Hey, so today in this podcast, I'm going to talk a little bit about attachment styles and how it comes up in relationships. Before, I used to talk about what it looks like to become an attached person, but I kind of want to discuss one attachment style in particular, and that's an anxious attachment style. And the reason that I wanted to talk about this is that recently I had a client that came to me for trauma therapy, and my trauma therapy is very intensive. I combined a couple different modalities. And during the intake or the beginning process, she basically admitted to me that she just ended a 5-year relationship with someone because the way they were coming up for her triggered her. And she said these triggers reminded her a lot about unhealthy and inconsistent patterns when she was younger. So, attachment styles, when you're thinking about attachment styles, what it comes to is like a few different types of attachment styles. We have people that are anxious, and then we have people that are avoidant. We have people that are secure. And then we have a combination, which is kind of like the fourth one, where there's a combination of anxiousness and avoidance. And my particular client has a combination of the two. And what makes it more devastating for her is that she learned these patterns with her mother. And I asked her to kind of look at the patterns that she has in her life, not just with her relationship with her previous partner, but some of the patterns that came up in her life with different people that she dated and friendships that she has. And we kind of came to this understanding that even the friends, even the working environment where she works, and the people that are in her work culture, there's a bit of toxic energy. And when I say toxic, it's more like inconsistency. It's more like looking for trouble or drama. When she would point things out or ask for certain things, she was ignored or dismissed. And what happens when you're a child and you're constantly ignored and dismissed, your needs are not being met. And so when your needs are not being met, you're coming from a place of not feeling secure and not feeling safe. Now, safe is the biggest word, right? Because whenever we are as adults, when we're in relationships with people, the thing that kids like the glue for us is that they make us feel like we're in a safe place with them, to be vulnerable, to share our experiences, to talk, to laugh, and have fun. And when you're coming from a place of growing up, being told that your feelings are not valid and they're dismissed and that you're never feeling safe, you're going to develop anxiousness. And that sometimes that looks like this: a person can always need validation to feel secure, or a person realizes very early on that they are not able to be taken care of and they have to be independent to get their needs met. And so when it comes to relationships, they avoid intimacy because they have learned early on that intimacy equals getting hurt. Being vulnerable means that their feelings can allow them to get hurt, and that's a very intense emotion for them, and they don't want to be in a place where they're feeling like they're vulnerable and then that person takes advantage of their emotions. So with my particular client, the thing that really sticks out for her in particular, and why I wanted to share this, is that she had mentioned that in her life her mother had her at a very young age, and she was a mother, well, she was a child of a mother who was a child, basically. And her upbringing was that she was always living at the auntie's houses or the grandparents' houses and in and out of different homes. And when mom decided to finally step up and be a mom to her, she was already a mature adult. And that caused a lot of friction. And some of the things that came up in the relationship for her was that even through her friendships, she would always give and give and give, and she was not being met in the middle and receiving. And this caused her to feel like her relationships are a little bit one-sided, and it would overwhelm her, where she would tell her friend, hey, I don't want to spend time with you anymore because I feel this is one-sided and I feel like I'm giving a lot of energy into this relationship, but I'm not getting anything back. That caused her friends to get very reactive. And that caused my client to feel overwhelmed and shut down and distance herself. The thing about people that have this anxious avoidant personality is that they get very anxious of this feeling of losing a person in their life that makes them feel temporarily secure or safe. And when they do lose this person, there's like this anxiety that, oh, I have to do whatever it takes to keep this person in my life, even though they're super toxic. And when that person starts to act out and get toxic, then this causes certain people with this type of attachment style to either shut down and get anxiety, and the cycle repeats itself. With this particular client, she had this predisposition to date people that are either emotionally unavailable or very one-sided, where she's the one that's giving a lot of energy and effort into the relationship and she's receiving very little. And it causes her to get anxious. One of her triggers is inconsistency, because that for her feels this feeling of not being able to rely on you, not feeling safe, not feeling um validated, right? And so I know that there's a lot of people here in the social media world, and the reason why I am sharing this is because I'm sure there's a lot of different people out there that who can relate. This resonates with you, and it oftentimes is from a trauma that happens in childhood, where we learn that if we're vulnerable, we're not going to be safe because that person will disappoint us. And that is something I wanted to share about this type of attachment style, is when to learn how to navigate your feelings when you're feeling anxious, when you're feeling like you're going to shut down. The other part of this I want people to understand is when you have an avoidant personality, you are taught at a very young age that you're not going to be safe regardless, that you're going to have some kind of independence of your own to not rely on people. And what happens in relationship is that when you're doing something that is inconsistent and pushes people away because you're afraid of getting hurt, you don't allow people in. And what that often looks like is self-sabotage. People who have been extremely traumatized at a young age, they get this feeling of, well, I need to protect myself, so I'm going to be hyper independent and I'm going to take care of myself, which is great. But then if they're a woman, they're in the masculine energy. They're not letting their femininity come in. They're always in driver's seat mode. They're never passenger seat mode, and they're always on the alert to not be taken advantage, to not be bullied, to not be hurt, to not be talked down on, to not feel trapped or cornered or financially abused, emotionally abused, or physically abused. Now, if you're a man, this is also kind of where men can, not, I'm not generalizing here, but some of my male clients that have had trauma that is a sexual nature, or they saw a lot of death in their life, or some kind of physical abuse or emotional neglect, have a tendency to keep people at arm's length. And that could look like when you do get into a relationship and you are afraid to let your guard down. When you do let your guard down, that could be scary in and of itself. And when it's scary, you shut down or you self-sabotage, and you get into a situation where you hurt your partner because you want to hurt them before they hurt you. And it's a way to protect yourself, but it's also, I would say this gently, it creates friction in order to help you run away, because emotionally bearing your soul is difficult. And healing a trauma wound as a child becomes really scary. So instead of taking responsibility, you avoid it by pushing people away, self-sabotaging, and creating situations where it's hostile and toxic. Um, and sometimes accountability is really important here, because sometimes people get into relationships when they have this anxious and avoidant attachment style, thinking that they're just going to go with the flow and see what happens. But when you're not doing the work and you're not healing the trauma, you're taking that baggage into the relationship. So I know that I'm talking a lot about what it looks like and how it comes up in relationships. Here's the other thing you don't, that not necessarily that you're not aware of. When we don't work on the trauma and heal it on the inside, with in the nervous system, and release it, the body keeps score, right? And so when we're not letting that go, when we're in a different relationship, we're comparing and contrasting. And it really, really, really is apples to oranges, because the new person you're dating is not the past. In some situations, when you have trauma and you have this anxiousness, the anxiousness also comes from a place of not wanting to be alone. So sometimes when you're alone, and I had a girlfriend just talk to me about that, women specifically, and a lot of men too, again, not generalizing, but a lot of people, when they're alone, they gravitate to a person that they may not feel is the right match for them. And they're not trying to use this person, but they end up doing so. And then that person starts to resent them. And then when the resentment comes, they tell them and point them out where the inconsistencies are. And when you have someone pointing out your inconsistencies, you get triggered and you get defensive, and it is a cycle. And some people gravitate to those that feel safe, and it's a very superficial safe, because that person reminds them of someone in their family. My girlfriend actually told me that her father had a very type of personality that was abrasive, and she dates men that tend to be abrasive and are emotionally abusive. My client is in the same situation. She dated a man that would gaslight her, manipulate her, very one-sided, would call her whenever he felt like it on his terms when it was convenient for him. And for her, that was just not pleasant at all. And I asked her, what happens when you think about your mom and how she comes up in your relationships? And she basically said that inconsistency, that inability to emotionally connect or be available, she gravitates to people that are like that, because it is now a trait that she's seen from her mother that is safe. It comes up in relationships, but it's really not safe. It's toxic. And now we're going to get to the meat and potatoes, which is where therapy comes in. When you see the pattern, to break it means when you are feeling vulnerable and alone and you're recognizing that that person is not for you, walking away is the hardest thing you could ever do. But it takes being uncomfortable to really make positive changes, because you have to really think about, what am I allowing into my life that's not working for me? And how do I walk away from those patterns earlier, faster, and in a way that will bring me closer and closer to the right person? So I'm not constantly on a hamster wheel going nowhere fast. And I know this is going to be a pretty long recording, so please bear with me, but I really wanted to share this because 3 people in a row, back to back, told me in this past week some of these behaviors that they're encountering. When you are used to seeing something at home and it's not healthy, it becomes the norm. To break that, you have to kind of like think outside of the situation, and look at what the patterns are. And if the patterns are resonating something that makes you get triggered, compare where it's coming from. Who in your family showed you that this was an acceptable behavior? And if you want to change this behavior, that means one of two or three options really. We confront it, we walk away from it, we do nothing. And people like being in the nothing sometimes, and that works for them. Sometimes you have to be in the nothing because you're deciding, when is your breaking point? When is it too much and overwhelming, and you need to walk away? So when we sit in the nothing, nothing changes. But that's okay, because it's scarier to make that change, because walking away from someone means you're starting at zero. Then there's no one in your life. If you're smart and you're dating the right way, you're going to be dating a couple different people and not sleeping with them. And yes, I'm judgmental in saying that, because women who sleep with men, they get attached. Men who sleep with women don't get attached, but they feel empty on the inside. Both feel empty for different reasons. So when you're walking away from a person, very, very early in the beginning, and you're just dating them casually and you're not sleeping with them, you're getting to know what we call the midot, by Jewish terms, the character traits. Character traits are really important because they tell us, is this person secure? Is this person able to handle conflict that comes up and resolve it in an amicable way? what is their fighting language? What do they like to do when they're frustrated or anxious and stressed? And I'm going to do another recording for what is the fighting language about. And it helps people understand it's more about the attachment styles, what fighting language looks like when you're dealing with people that shut down or are very anxious that they helicopter. And so when you're figuring out these patterns very early on when you're dating, it's easier to let go because then you're possibly dating or talking to someone else that just might be a better match for you. And I'm not telling people to date a million people, right? And that's not the goal of this podcast at all. But it's healthier to walk away from something that is not a good match. If you are not in alignment with your values and religion, that means it's not a good match. So if you're Jewish and they're Christian and you're both not religious, but you kind of have the same morals and compass and ideals that you want to work through, and if you're able to kind of meet in the middle and say, this is how I would like to raise my children in the future, that might work for you. But if you're a religious Jewish person, you're a religious practicing Christian, then that is kind of like it is under the same division, different departments. And sometimes those different departments have those bureaucratical, guidelines. And sometimes those guidelines don't match with the other department's guidelines, right? I don't know how to describe that in any other way. But the other thing is when you're not talking about uh, things that are important like money, sex, how many kids you're going to have, where do you want to live, what is your parenting style like, you're going to see a lot of problems. And if those things are not talked about very early on in the relationship, this is where all the arguments come up and the frustrations come up. So if you're in a relationship and you're in a holding pattern, that person is never going to commit to you. Why? Because they're comfortable with the status quo, and making the commitment when you're an anxious or avoidant person is overwhelming. And they're too scared about the future and the unknowns. But when you're talking about these things up front in the beginning of the relationship, you're getting to know them and you're understanding whether the person is ready, mature, and able to handle difficult things, or if they're so emotionally not developed as a human and you need to walk away. And when you're an anxious person, the most triggering thing for that person is to walk away, because that means they might need to be alone for a little bit again. And that is overwhelming and isolating for someone who's very anxious. For an avoidant person, it's very easy to walk away. They're used to being alone. They were betrayed at a young age. They were taught to be independent. They were taught that their needs don't matter. So they've learned to isolate themselves from people sometimes, or they're really great at masking how they are like in the very beginning. And then when it gets very difficult and you have to show a more concerted effort, the cracks begin to show in the foundation. And these people run from commitment. They're terrified because that means they have to be vulnerable and let their guard down. And that is very difficult. They get very overwhelmed. And when they get overwhelmed, they shut down. They ghost, they disappear, they get quiet. Some people have learned with these types of attachment styles through proper trauma therapy, to address these things that are painful. And that's where we talk about, what are your fighting languages like? Can you meet in the middle? Recognizing your triggers in your partner is kind of half the battle. Compromising, meeting each other in the middle is really where you heal and begin to process things that need to be processed. But when you are in flight or fight response, and that's your attachment style, the first thing that happens is you either shut down completely or you're very anxious, or you spiral and do both if you're an anxious attachment and an avoidant attachment individual. They're actually, I think the term is called disorganized attachment style, where it's just all over the place. So I wanted to kind of address this and bring it up in a podcast because this is happening to a lot of people. They are growing up in very trauma-oriented homes that is intergenerational. And if you want to break that trauma and have a healthy relationship and show your future children what a healthy dynamic looks like, then you have to look at the patterns that you are continuing to contribute. My girlfriend, she keeps continuing to date certain types of men that continue that type of trauma for her. My clients have patterns of seeing their mother or their father go through people over and over and over again. It's like an open, never ending door that's open, revolving door. They're not seeing stability. They're seeing absence of stability, dysfunction. So, and I know we talk about a lot of trauma in therapy world and all over podcasts. This is a known thing now. And I wanted to kind of shed light on these specific types of personalities because this is coming from a place of insecurity and fear. And when you have insecurity and fear, this is what drives a lot of people to question and either close down or get very, very anxious. And I had a client, I'll never forget that she was married with a man, and he had a very avoidant, dismissive attachment style, and she had a very anxious attachment style. So when she was activated and triggered for whatever it is that she didn't feel secure, she would helicopter him. She would go from one room to the other room of their apartment, and she would parrot the same questions over and over and over again, and he would shut down and walk away, and it was like the hamster wheel of nowhere. And creating boundaries with individuals like that is super important, but also when they were dating, that should have been something that's addressed. How are you like when you're stressed? What is a trigger for you, and what do you need from your partner to know about you that will help them accommodate you when you're feeling triggered or when you're feeling overwhelmed and you're shutting down? Like, do you need to go into your cave for a couple of days? What is it that people need to know about you that will make it easier when you guys are able to communicate? So just wanted to share a little bit of this. If you have questions, I would love your questions. Please respond. And if you ever want to come to therapy and work on it, I would love to sit down with you and kind of help you through that. I have a program specifically for people who have suffered this type of trauma and they need healing so that their relationships could thrive. And I look forward to hearing from you guys. And I'm wishing you a wonderful day and just be mindful. Take care.